What do you do when it's your time to mourn, to cry, to grieve? Grief can be a lonely road. Where does it start and where does it end? Join us on this intimate journey of discovery, healing, and transformation. This documentary will explore the many facets of grief.
I want to say, first of all, I want to thank you for joining us on this episode of Grief Journeys. And I just kind of want to start out, if you could just kind of tell us, what does grief mean to you? When you hear the word grief, how do you define it?
Wow, a question that you can answer so many different ways. Grief is complicated. It's complicated because it's different for every person. And I think it's different for each situation, depending on your relationship with that person. Having experienced grief very early in my life, I would say that each experience was different, each time that I went through it.
And I do want to preface this, as you talked about growing up, I think that you also have a unique perspective on grief, based on the fact that your family was kind of in the business
Yes,
of dealing with death, dying, and grief, and helping people mourn and grieve.
yes,
Could you tell us a little bit about that?
yes. Well, my father was a funeral director ever since I can remember. I think he went to school, gosh, let me see. He was probably going for about a good 40 years before his passing. My exposure to it, of course, was pretty much all my life. During that time, he was a partner with another individual the funeral home was actually part of his house. Some people might be familiar with that, where the funeral home is actually, half of it is the house and the other half is the business. So any point in time, you always had,
A body?
thank you, I don't know if that was okay to say, that might be out there or laid out, for example, or the chapel might be in use, because we also, of course, had a chapel.
So you could actually come home from school and the body could actually be in a part of the house.
Well, his partner
His body.
did. He actually lived in the house with the business, but we were there often. So exposure to it, myself and the other kids, his kids, like I said, our perspective was very different because we were around it so much, and so to see that maybe a couple of times a week was normal.
A lot of times people have a difficult time even grappling with the idea of death. Um, is it possible to ever become comfortable with death? And because you say it was a constant thing, did you become comfortable with the idea of death and dying?
I don't know if
And
it's
is that possible?
I don't know if it's so much a comfort level in as much as it is something that you just know that simply is. You know that it's normal. We know that there is a beginning and an end. Whether it's professional, where it's someone else, or when it becomes personal, you do have a certain perspective because you have a certain insight. You you know how the business works. You know what the process is, and for those of us who have actually gone through the education, you learn. Well, I would say everything from not just the business end, the psychological end, the social end, and the chemical ends, if I may say. And then when you look at how other religions also see their perspective on that. And so all those things kind of come together for your own perspective. I think it's just another phase, that we go on to. We all have our place in this universe, our place here. And when we go on to the next, when it's time to go on, it's time to go on. I think our time here is what we give to others, how we have not necessarily influence others, but what we give to others on a day-to-day basis. Sometimes you don't know what you're giving to someone else. In the business, like I said, when you're trying to comfort the family or an individual, sometimes it's because people always say, well, I don't know what to say, or I don't know what to do. Sometimes nothing. Sometimes it's simply just being there. If you're ever, maybe the next time you're at a service, I watch the funeral director. He or she may not say very much, but only thing they might do, they might be a simple touch, maybe you cross a smile on the back. Sometimes that's all that person needs. Maybe sometimes the words is not needed, during those times. And I think sometimes people forget that. It's like sometimes you don't need to say anything.
So it's really just your presence is sometimes the most comforting thing that you can give to a person, as opposed to words and explanations or.
Yes, because most things cannot be explained. Death can't really be explained. It's, everybody might have their different ideas about what it is, but your presence is what gives that person comfort, because your presence is what tells them that you care, because you're there. Patience. Yes, patience. Yeah, day by day, patience.
So you believe that time really does heal all?
It does. It does. I think each day probably gets better, and because as I was saying, everybody's relationship with that loved one is going to be different. Your grief may be different. You might go on for years and still feel something for an individual that you've lost. But maybe around that anniversary, you might go do whatever it is that you did with that person. I have friends who have lost loved ones, and they celebrate in different ways. One cooks, another one might go fishing, another one goes shopping, and she takes it all back. It's just the way that they handle that. It's the way that they feel close to that person on that day, because it's whatever it is that they did with that person, and that gives them comfort. I think as long as your grief is not crippling you and keeping you from functioning in life, I don't think anybody can tell you how to not grieve or celebrate that individual.
And as I said, you've had to see a lot of people deal with grief on a day-to-day basis. And do you find that your profession was able to equip you for your own journey when you yourself had to cross over that threshold and lose someone that was very close to you, and you came face to face with grief yourself?
Certainly. I think because of education, the learning of death, understanding the process, both from a mental, understanding what you actually go through mentally, different stages of grief. You understand better what it is that you're going, or why you're feeling what you're feeling, or not feeling. There's no guarantee necessarily that you're going to go through all the stages, because everybody doesn't. Some people just go from 2 to 6 and okay, I'm fine. But you don't know what that person's journey was before. So
when you lost your loved one, your most significant journey, the one that had the most impact and that was most influential in terms of you having to apply the head knowledge to your journey, Who was that journey? Who propelled you into that journey?
Well, there were actually so many. I will say this. My first experience, and I think your first experience is probably your harshest one, because you don't know. You don't know what you're going to feel, especially depending on how young you are. Now, I was 12, and it was a very devastating loss. It took me months to get over, because it was tragic, and it was someone who was closer to my age at the time. But what it did teach me was that, there's tomorrow, or like I said, things do get better. So that was my foundation.
When you say tragic,
It was suicide.
so Pam, I want to kind of circle back because I really felt the emotions of your first grief journey when you talked about your cousin. And what did you say her name was?
Delphine.
Delphine.
Mm-hmm.
And she was 17 and you were 12. That it seems like it shaped your whole life, your whole perspective on life.
Well, actually, it shaped a lot of things. I started writing, so I still write because of that situation. It allowed me to to get emotions out, and I continue to write a lot.
Speaking of emotions, what were some of the emotions that you felt? Because I think a lot of times we don't talk about suicide. We don't, because it's so taboo in a lot of ways. And so sometimes we don't even know how to articulate how we feel, or we don't know what to say to the family members and the survivors. So when you were writing, what were you trying to get out? What were the words that you were trying to articulate, and what was the pain that you were feeling?
I think for the most part, again at 12, you always have questions. And the questions are always, everybody wants to know why. Of course, later on, you realize that you're never really going to know why. You might guess, you might have an idea of some of the things that may have been going on in that person's life, but only that person really knows.
So when it happened, do you remember the day that it happened?
Yes. I can tell you when it happened. I can probably tell you how long it took.
Take us there.
Let's see. I was doing what I don't like to do, or what I didn't like to do at 12, was my chores. Was washing dishes, when the call came through. And I think it was kind of surreal, because, I didn't believe that it actually happened. But after that, everything was kind of like a blur. I do remember it took 2 weeks.
Who found her?
Well, it happened really quickly. She wasn't necessarily found. Everybody was home. So it was sort of an instantaneous thing. She died in an ambulance. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
How did her parents deal with it?
Anger, extreme sadness, of course. My mom didn't go to the service, but she was very popular, and it was red and white and everywhere.
You mean your cousin was Delphine?
Delphine, yes.
She was popular?
Yes. So her service was like, God, it was red and white. It's like the school just kind of like came out and drove.
Was her favorite colors red and white? Or?
Yeah. So I think their high school colors were red and white, and so the school, everybody just kind of came out for her. Mm-hmm. So, but we ended up having 2 services because they were from Baltimore. So had a service in Baltimore, and then we came down to South Carolina, which is where the family was from, and that was yet another service, which was very grueling. Which I just remember it was just really grueling. It was like, why are we doing all of this? Because it's a lot to go through emotionally, because it's what you're dealing with. So it took 2 weeks.
Well, who was she? Tell us a little bit about her.
She was a good person. She was kind. She looked out for you. She didn't break the rules. I think she tried her best to be a good person.
Are there any signs that she was dealing with any depression? Or?
Yeah, I think later on there were signs there as far as depression. I think that oftentimes when you're dealing with teenagers, they say, oh, well, just having a sad day or just feeling some sadness. I don't know if anyone realized how serious it was. Because emotionally, teenagers have hormones raging and kind of bouncing off the walls. But evidently hers was more serious than people realize. And, but then again, this was years ago. The way I would say, I'm just going to say culturally, that we deal with that is that we don't deal with it.
And that was, like you said, years back. Was there any type of support for the other, teenagers or for your other family members who were just 12 and other teenagers to learn how to cope with that? Or did you have to cope on your own?
On your own. That's exactly. The way you deal with it is you just don't really deal with it. Sometimes I think maybe it depends on the family. Whether or not you have that kind of relationship where you have a closeness and if you have a loss, you come together and you grieve that person. My particular family didn't do that. We went through. I know after she passed, we went through a series of seemed like endless. People just kept passing away. I know it seemed like 3 a year. It just kept coming and coming and coming. I don't think there was any time for anybody to grasp anything. My father had 11 brothers and sisters. Now, he's gone now, but there's 2 left. But over a few years, a lot of them passed. Many of them passed away.
So it sounds like that when you had your first grief journey, that you were kind of propelled into a whirlwind of grief, and it was like one after another. So it was kind of even hard for you to process, your way out of it. So did you have a long grief journey or long time of trying to deal with, how do I deal with these feelings?
Yeah, let me see. I think I dreamt a lot. I wrote a lot. Those that passed after, again, it's about those relationships, your closeness. I didn't have that same kind of journey with them because I didn't have the same kind of closeness with them that I had with her. So I was still dealing with her. I couldn't really deal with that. It was like, okay, Uncle so-and-so, all right. Aunt so-and-so, okay. It was like, okay, now we got to go back and do this again. For my family, and I can only speak for mine, we just didn't show a whole lot of emotion. So that's what we got.
What would you say to someone who is dealing with the loss of a loved one, and that loss was by way of suicide, and they're stuck and they're hurting? What comforting words would you give them as someone who has traveled that way and traveled that path?
Mm-hmm. I would probably say it's not your fault. I won't say simply losing a person. I think it's a different process. It's a different type of grief because you're dealing with other emotions, other than, I mean, you're dealing with loss and your own personal, which you might feel as your responsibility.
Could you explore that in terms of dealing with their loss and dealing with the other things that you say accompany that?
Well, with the suicide, like I said, a lot of times the family members, you're searching for answers. You tend to go internally, or you might go externally and say, well, it's your fault. You shouldn't have made her angry. You shouldn't have put him in that situation to allow him to do that. Or I should never have made the gun available. If I had not bought that gun, she would still be here. So you go through the blame. You start blaming yourself when it's not your fault, because if the person was going to, they would have. You would not have been able to stop that. You can only do what you can do, and then, the rest is really out of your hands. It's left up to him, and you know what I mean? It's left up to God at this point. We have no control. But you have to forgive. You forgive, yes. You forgive yourself, and, you begin your journey.
Speaking of, you said that it's, in your words, up to God. How has your faith and how did your faith help you in that journey in dealing with that particular death?
Tomorrow. Always a tomorrow. The sun's going to come up tomorrow. It's always another day. And you learn that. And, he tells you that. Yeah.
Taking one day at a time.
Yeah. And like I said, it gets better.
It gets better.
Yeah.
How long do you think your grief journey was, or are you still in it?
With her, or in general, or with her, it was a long time because I was learning. I'd say at least a year. Like I said, I dreamt a lot. I wrote a lot. I did have an aunt that I did speak, that I would talk to periodically. But
did you say you dreamed a lot?
Oh yes, I was in my room. It was daytime, and there was like a mist, white mist, and she was just in white. And then she left.
If you could dream another dream, see it one more time, what would you say to it?
It's okay. It's okay. Life is good. Yeah. I think we really need to pay a lot more attention to each family member and what's going on in the family dynamics. Because, as I said earlier, a family that goes through a suicide death, I think is a little bit different than the general mourning. There's a lot of other psychological factors that are happening, not just to the individuals, but to those relationships. Who blames who? Who is feeling what? Or who's talking or not talking? I think it probably takes a little bit longer because of that. I think the grief process is different, and it takes a little bit longer. Maybe the stages take a little bit longer.
So I think what you're saying is one thing that they can do is be patient with themselves.
Extremely. And like I said, don't be afraid to talk to each other or talk to somebody. Because the more you talk it out, the better it is.
So first thing you're saying is be patient, and secondly is seek help if you need it.
Oh, absolutely. Because you're probably going to. Yeah. I don't think that's a situation where anybody, like I said, you don't have the answers. So. talk to somebody or find somebody to talk to. I think as adults need to acknowledge that children are grieving. And not that we can all put aside our own feelings, but they need attention or they're gonna struggle. Or it'll come out later at some point. Not always good. Seen some tragedies there, so you don't want to do that. You don't want to leave the children out there by themselves to figure it out and to deal with it. But you need to be talking to the children. And if you can't do it, find someone who can. But you need to let them know that they can talk to somebody, that it is okay.